thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about my absolute favorite game design topic. Also something that I've been working on for most of my career, and so yeah, I'm going to talk to you about emergent narrative. And this talk is actually I wanted this talk to be both technical but also inspirational. It's going to be accessible, and nothing is going to be, I think, too complicated. I just want to share my love for something that not a lot of game creators actually focus on, and maybe convince you that emergent narrative may be a good way for you to tell interesting stories to players. So just a little bit about me. I spent most of my career between big companies, actually, between 2K in Czech Republic, in San Francisco as well, where I released Mafia III, so I followed the entire game development process for the game, focusing on choices and on dialogue systems and on everything that could make an interesting story for players. I then joined Darewise to work on an MMO, and recently I'm a senior game designer at Dontnod Entertainment, which is a studio you might know, working on really the promise of interesting and meaningful choices for the players. And on the side, I'm also participating in a small video game, not really company, more of a handful of developers passionate about game development, which is Nekomatata Games, organizing the weekly game jam, which you might join because they're making a cool game, and it's a very cool community. But I wanted to also talk about, yes, this little guy. I'm a little bit older now, and I'm not wearing a Ninja Turtle sweatshirt anymore, but still my Game Boy is near me. Basically, yeah, it's been almost 10 years I'm in the game industry now. The one thing that I'm very passionate about is the intersection of narrative and game systems. So really, how can we actually generate interesting stories for players through rules, through choices, and through systems, which is really something that I'm passionate about, and I focus about, and why I'm talking to you today. As a teenager, just a little bit background for me, I used to write stories on Football Manager forums. So the stories are very, very developed in the Football Manager community. It's basically a bunch of players who tell other players about their specific save game, about their specific game that they have, about their clubs, about how they all the stories that were generated from when they started and up until when they tell the public about this. I was very active, and it was for me a way to share my passion about the game, which then I transmitted about making the game where people actually could tell stories about. So I released Mafia III in 2016. I also present and I talk about my work. I share about my work quite regularly to first to formalize my findings and to share them with people. Very simple as that. And I told you that I'm working on an action RPG at Dontnod Entertainment right now. What I want to talk to you about is a bit of a revolution. I had to include a French flag in this presentation. Otherwise, I would be breaking a law. No, that's not true, but still, this is something I needed to talk about. Right now, I'm sure you've had presentations about narrative, about animation. But the thing is that with games, there are some things that are really specific to the medium that we're working on, with computers, we can tell stories in a very different way, and of course there are some things and some methods that we can apply to make them happen. But somehow it's approaching the way that we write stories, but we are not really writing stories in a game about emergent narrative. It's about generating them, and this is something that I'm going to present you. But basically, it's going to be a little bit different than other mediums and how we traditionally approach writing stories. So for this, I want to first specify, emergent narrative. This is something that's a little bit abstract. We might hear it a lot, and my goal here is to clarify what really it is about, for me at least. The thing is that it starts from a mandate that I think everyone can relate to, and that's something fascinating for a lot of people. And this narrative mandate is that you're going to live player stories unique to your game in a complex world, fueled by your decisions and choices that only you will live. And this is really the heart of emergent narrative, is about all of that. And that's fueled imagination of game makers, but not only that. It's of course something that's really this epic goal for game development, and for some things that really is quite complicated to grasp, but that everyone dreams about. This is something that is also a very it's not a recent topic, because everyone games explore this idea of emergent narrative regularly, but they're not necessarily mainstream. You might hear about emergent narrative from other sources like press. In EVE Online, for example, there are books written about the game, about the stories that actually happened in the game, and there is an audience for that, and I am one of it. I love a good EVE Online story, and these are the ones that I feel are very, very interesting. This idea of an MMO where there are huge corporations and very big, complicated political intrigues is something that I find amazing, and this is almost something that I find more enjoyable to read about than to play. And this is actually quite interesting. Crusader Kings III released recently, and one of the biggest story last year in September is that a player ate the Pope in Crusader Kings III, which obviously was shared in a lot of websites, but this is obviously a very for me a very funny story, and something that was not scripted in the game. This is really a player who wanted to do a silly things and really achieved that goal through the game systems. And then you have watchdogs as well. The fact that systems have generated characters that were inappropriate. This is also something that I find very interesting, because somehow it raises questions about the role of systems in our lives, and ethics, and a bunch of very important topics that, of course, are right now very relevant for game developers, but also tech companies and AI. How do we actually include ethics in our AI systems, and the way that can prevent from causing harm? So all of this is very relevant to our society today. The interesting thing about emergent narrative and about this promise is that it's not specific to games. It captures an imagination. This is the whole pitch of Westworld, for example, where you can see the simulation of a game, and how players can actually make a whole lot of choices and impact the story that's being written for them. And the whole series is very popular, and for a good reason, because it's very good. But it's incredible to see creators of TV series actually being very inspired by emergent narratives, just like Ready Player One, where it's really about playing a massive multiplayer game online and being and actually making a name for yourself in that second life. So really, it's a topic that I think everyone is going to agree has massive potential. At the heart of emergent narrative design is first, it's the ability to create systems. So systems design is a branch of game design. It's usually it's focusing on open-ended systems, so something that you can play a lot, that doesn't have a finite end for itself, including interesting choices in the game that you're playing, a depth also, some really some opportunities for the players to learn and to grow and to be able to master some decisions and some systems that they interact with, and tangible outcomes. So something that you can really see on a screen. You can see the effect that you had on a game system, because it's giving you that output of, yes, I changed the game and now it's showing me the impact of my choices. And then on the other hand, you have narrative design as well. So in narrative design, here the important thing is to really treat gameplay as the story. So it's not necessarily about writing. It's about making sure that somehow the game that the players are making also have a meaning, something that's really, okay, why am I playing this game? What are the themes that are actually accompanying me into this gameplay? And so narrative design is really here to feed meaning into gameplay. It's also based on key moments. That this is more of traditional writing, but this is still very, very important. And key moments, characters, and events that the players will remember. This is something that's very, very interesting. It's not enough to write a story, to define characters, but you need to design for memorability, for the fact that players are going to remember something, and then they are going to tell their friends about it, and then who are going to tell their friends about it as well. And so this is that healthy loop of incredible stories that you want to share. So at the heart of emergent narrative design, you have that love between systems and narrative design. And this is really these two big but still narrow fields of game and narrative design that really feed each other and should work hand in hand. So we have different types of narrative for video games. The first one is about enacting narrative. So here, this is really the story that you play. Here I told you about gameplay as story, and this is really about that. Then you have linear narrative, so the story that you're told through cinematics or dialogues, for example. You have environmental storytelling. So here, this is much more about digging a story that's hidden in the game world, but where you're going to discover through level design and things that are placed in the game space that you're playing. You also have branching narrative. So here, this is really the story that you choose to have between different paths available to your gameplay. Then there are optional narrative, the story that you uncover, things that may not be a path of part of the critical path, but are still going to be discovered by players and shared as secrets on the internet and on all other amazing ways to share about your findings in video games. And then the last type of narrative is emergent. So emergent narrative, and this is something that's actually harder to describe. How do you actually find, and this is quite hard to do. I've done this exercise myself, and it's a little bit tricky to find one word that actually summarizes everything that emergent stories and emergent narrative are about. So I'm going to try to do that today. We have different types. So I told you about the different types of narrative, and now I'm going to tell you about the different types of emergent narrative. So here I'm going to focus on what I call the generated emergent narrative. So here, these are system-driven stories, things that are not completely written and scripted by a writer, or by a designer, or by a narrative designer. These are stories that emerge from and that are generated by a bunch of code, actually a code, data, a system that lives on its own, about a simulation that lives in a game. These are also creating tangible stories that you can see on the screen, and not just in the imagination of the players. Generated emergent narrative also is focused on several characters, not just one, but several characters to tell a company, to tell a compelling story about. An open-ended game structure. Generally, these games don't have an end, and you can play them over and over again and generate different stories. You have simulated systems and logic attached to all of that. So some part of game elements actually live on their own through AI, through a simulation of a world that is not entirely centered on the player. So games like that, you've may heard about Watch Dogs Legion, and the fact that you can play as anyone in that world. This is pretty much the whole promise of the game, and why it was a breakthrough in game design. In Shadow of Mordor, and Shadow of War, you have also this Nemesis system, where you have a whole hierarchy of orcs that really define the game structure and the objectives for the players. But every time that you start the game, you have a different hierarchy, a different social structure that is presented to you based on characters that are generated and are different every time that you play. So this is generated stories in action adventure games. You also have generated stories, generated emergent narrative in strategy. So games like Crusader Kings III, for example, that are really focused on dynasties and a lot of characters. First, really focused on the historical aspects, like really when you start playing the game, it's exactly the state of Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia. And then as soon as you start playing the game, then it branches out, and it's the simulation, your choices are going to render completely different outcomes. You have XCOM, where you are managing a bunch of soldiers defending against an alien invasion, and all the fact that you are constituting a squad, and all the soldiers are progressing. They are earning nicknames, for example. Like, you can really relate to these characters as they evolve, but they might die, and this is what creates a meaningful story for them. And then games like Mountain Blade 2 as well, where you're here, you're managing on a map. Here you're really feeding the story of more of a medieval place, where you're first managing one character and then a bunch of characters that you are going to have to manage to accomplish goals that are actually mostly player driven. The game doesn't. These games usually don't impose a very specific goal. This is more the case for XCOM, but for Crusader Kings and Mountain Blade, the goals are also emergent. The players are going to choose how they want to play the game and what they want to achieve with them. Then you have simulations, pure, what we can call pure simulations, like Football Manager, which I talked about. I could talk about the game for days, but it's really about, yeah, you're a football manager and you're going to make hard choices. Some players are going to join your squad and you're going to have a lot of love for them, and then they're going to disappoint you, and they're going to really create these sometimes heartbreaking stories about people that you don't necessarily care about that end up being incredible, and some that you really, really care about and end up disappointing you. And all of these stories are not written in the game. They're generated by systems, by simulation, by some parts of randomness that players cannot control. The Sims 4 here, well, this the whole Sims franchise and promise, where you are managing characters, but also their social circles, families, dynasties, and all of the stories that are generated from them and their needs and their middle class life in American suburbs, and RimWorld or Dwarf Fortress, where you are again managing a crew of people who are here to survive first and to defend against different dangers from a world that's quite hostile. But it's also something that's made it to board games with the legacy genre. Especially, there are few legacy games, but for me, the one that really explores the idea is Pandemic Legacy, with 3 seasons available. And the fact is that when you open the box, it's the same box for everyone else, but then as soon as you finish it, because you can finish this game, the box is going to look completely different from one player to another. And that's because of the choices that you've made in the game, and also some random parts that you cannot control. Against them, I'm reusing some keywords about things that you cannot control, characters and all of this, and you can really, I hope you can start to grasp some common themes between all of these experiences. Then you have improvised emergent narrative as another type. So improvised emergent narrative, these are people-driven stories. This is really about imagination, about real people in real life actually driving these stories against generated. This is computer-driven. Here it's people-driven, so it's a little bit different. It can be a tangible story, something that you can see on a screen, or not. Most of the improvised emergent narrative actually lives in the imagination of players. This is not something that is necessarily written, or something that's that you can see or touch. It mostly lives in the stories that we tell each other. It can include metagames, so forums and in real life. It can be collaborative or competitive gameplay. It really depends. And this is something that you see in online games a lot. For example, so Sea of Thieves, you're a bunch of pirates who are, who can fight against other pirates who are really real players, but you can also go on expeditions and discover the world. EVE Online, which I already talked about, you're a captain of a ship and you can join corporations and wage wars, and it's a big political and sci-fi simulation experience in online gaming. And then 1 Hour, 1 Life, very interesting game and experiment from Jason Rohrer. which is about civilization. And the concept is that in 1 hour you are going to be born and dead within 1 hour, but you're going to be born from another player. So you really have a mummy at the start of the game, and and one of my experience actually in the game is that within 2 minutes of my gaming, I had my mom, my virtual, but still it was an actual player who told me things about the game that I didn't know, and within 2 minutes, that player told me, "I love you, my child," which was an interaction that I never thought would happen in a video game in my whole life, and then it happened in 1 hour, one life. So I really recommend you to play. It's not necessarily accessible, but it's a very interesting experiment and game. Then you also have, obviously, tabletop role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons and all of these TRPGs, and this is a really TTRPGs. I think this is the acronym. This is really the whole promise and the whole value about these games is about the stories that you're going to tell within your group, and that the role of the game master is actually to create the settings and to then let the players express themselves and actually invent a whole new story that they're going to make for themselves, and really fueled by imagination and fueled by group thinking. But you also have live action role-playing games. This is all about, gathering together, to pretend and to play together, and to make memories together as well. And so these are improvised emergent narrative that are still very important, and I feel very mature as well in the way that they tell stories that you're going to remember. And then in recent years, some experiments. One specifically has happened, which I think is very interesting. It's called AI Dungeon. And here, this is what new technology is actually bringing, because AI Dungeon is about machine learning, and all of these new technologies available for the tech industry, but now as well the entertainment industry and art. And here in AI Dungeon, you're really starting with very simple themes, but then you're going to feed the computer with the things that you want to do, and it's going to react by creating a story that's going to be unique to your gameplay. And here, I call this hybrid because it's both generated from the computer and improvised by the player. And so all of this creates a mix that's very interesting and very new as well in games. I'm sure other experiments have been done and will be done on these kinds of technologies and on these kinds of game designs. But this is the fact that we have hybrids coming is also something that's quite new in game design, and that's obviously very interesting to explore. So here, what I want to focus on is actually generated emergent narratives. So the ones that are created by computers, not improvised, not hybrids. But generated, because I think this is mostly because most of my research is on this, but also because I firmly think that it's also the type of emergent narrative that has the most potential, but also is not really valued that much, or not really comprehended very well by game creators or by a lot of people in the industry. We talk a lot about choices, about branching narrative, about optional narrative, about linear ones, about really gameplay as a story. But here, the intersection of systems and narrative design are not what most games focus on. And so we're going to dive deeper into this specific topic. So you've probably heard a lot about emergent gameplay. This is something that I think I've been documented a lot. You know, how to provoke good emergent gameplay is about providing tools, different tools for the players to combine to solve their problems. Solving problems is really at the heart of game design. For narrative design and for emergent narrative, the story is the craft is a little bit different. So this is emergent gameplay, combining multiple tools and systems to solve challenges in a way that that players make feel smart about, that feels creative and unique, and that they can tell their people, oh, and their friends, oh, I discovered a solution that I know the developers didn't think about, and that may be true, but most of the time it's not. It's just that as developers, we're quite manipulative, and we can make you think that you had a solution in mind that was not at all thought of, but actually most of the times we do, unless it's bugs. It's another type of emergent narrative. So, okay, so this is emergent gameplay. This is about combining multiple tools and systems to solve challenges, but what about emergent narrative? So here there's a very interesting representation of a theory about motivation in games, about motivation, not only in games, but about motivation in life for people. It's called the self-determination theory. And it's also something that's very interesting to grasp in game design, but also UX, so user experience point of view, to really understand more about psychology, about cognitive science, about how people learn every day, and how motivation works. And obviously, this is a very big topic for game design. So the first thing that's important for people is about autonomy, about feeling that you can make choices, you have control over your life, over your game, and over the things that you're going to do in your future. You also need to feel relatedness, so how you connect to your environment, to people, but also to objects, to the things that are really part of your everyday environment, and that are part of your life. How do you connect emotionally to all of this? And then competence. So motivation is also related to how good you feel you are about a specific subject. No one wants to really suck at something. We all want to feel that we are good, or we are getting better, or we are somehow a master of some topic. That may not always be true, but we need to feel that. Because that makes us feel good, and this fuels our motivation every day, and when we are handling our life choices, but also our game choices. So emergent gameplay is really at the intersection of autonomy and competence. You are able to find a creative solution about a problem you're facing, and you feel good about the solution that you actually found, because the game didn't tell you how to do it. You figured it out yourself, and this is what feels good, and this is what makes emergent gameplay really combination through creativity. But emergent narrative is actually different. Here, it's not about being competent. It's not about combining things to solve an issue. It's about story. It's about your connection to something. You still need to feel autonomy. So this is the common the common threads to these topics. Autonomy. This is what makes Emergent. But here it's not about feeling good about your skills. It's about relating to what's happening on a screen and in a video game that fuels your imagination, and that you feel that you're connecting to and you're connected to this specific story that you are witnessing. And so this is the main difference between emergent gameplay and emergent narrative. This is about relatedness, empathy, rather than skill. So what is emergent narrative then? Talk about it a lot, so let's again dive deeper into the subject. So emergent narrative happens when the players are the witnesses and the actors of an event or a series of events generated from a combination of systems, creating a sense of story that feels unique and personal to their gameplay. So we are going to stop on these things one by one. First, witnesses and actors. Here, the beauty of systems and narrative design is being both a witness and an actor. What do I mean is that we have the idea of emergent systems like the game of life, for example, which is very known as this system that actually creates interesting visual patterns and creating these interesting visual outcomes. But the thing is that you may be a small actor because you're basically choosing the start state of this game, but then everything else is going to be generated. Everything else is just out of your control. And so most of the emergent systems experiments that have been done through computers actually are making you much more of a witness of something than an actor. And emergent games make you feel both. You are making choices. You are actively participating to the story and to the stories that are happening in the game, but you also witness that thing in a tangible way on screen. And this is something that you can screenshot, that you can share, that you then can tell your friends about. But this is, you have a tangible save, you have data, you have something that actually exists and that only you have on your computer. And this is what makes it meaningful. Then you have event or series of events about this. So here, this is much more about a traditional way to tell stories, right? There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end, and somehow they are all related. You have character arcs, for example, people who have long lives, short lives, dramatic or calm. It depends. But all of these are interesting and intricate types of stories, but it's still narrative is about things that you remember, but that have a common thread and something that you can follow and sometimes finish, because that's important as well. Then you have generated from a combination of systems. So this is what we saw about emergence, about the definition of emergence. The definition of emergence is about combination. So I made one choice and then another one, and then it mixed into a random factors that created a story that felt completely unique. So, for example, one of my favorite emergent narrative story is that in XCOM, I renamed one of the soldiers with the name of my sister. And so Sophie Boicherot was a soldier in my game, and she actually was very, very good. Maybe I took care of her, especially I didn't want her to die, but it's still something that happened. So first system, I renamed her. This is a system. This is, you have the ability to rename things or name characters. Then she heard she gained a nickname that I got to choose as well. And I don't remember the specific nickname, but it felt like something that was chosen just for her. And so that was pretty interesting. But then at some point of the story, there are some events that happened, and some soldiers are actually chosen to become mechs and mechas, and wear exoskeletons to make them really war machines. But then the choice here was that I would have to cut the leg off of my sisters to be able to wear that mecha and to become a war machine. And so I was really confronted into this horrible choice of my sister wanted to cut both her legs to be able to become a mech, and that's my story. And this is why I'm telling you about this, is that there was a combination of choices about things that I did in the game that created something, a story that then I can share to with other people. These are small, not overly complicated systems about renaming, about a soldier being chosen, but it's still a meaningful story for me. Then it's about something that feels unique as well. So this is something that's really important about emergent narrative as well, because this is what defines and this is what separates emergent narrative from branching narrative. Because for branching narrative, you know that you have choice A, you have choice B, you have choice C, and they have specific outcomes. Sometimes these outcomes can get really deep into a tree that goes quite deep. But most likely, it's a shape like that, and then it comes back to maybe 3-4 specific ends. This is not like that for emergent narrative, because you have so many possibilities. Every time that you're going to play the game, it's going to be different. Some stories are going to be the same, but most of the time it's just a complexity. The complexity of systems are going to make it special and unique and different every time. And this is something that obviously brings a lot of value for players, because it's really your story. This is not something that the marketing team is telling you that, yeah, you're going to live that unique story that was tailored just for you. Here, it's true. The fact that you're making this and making all these choices, and then the random factors of all of that makes it really unique to your gameplay. And then personal or collective story. This is really about empathy, about the fact that, yes, we want that story we want to relate to that story. I told you about the story of my sister, but then the idea with this is to really care about characters. It's to care about the story that's going to be told. And all of that, of course, if you're completely, if you're seeing stories in a game that you feel, okay, this is complex, there are lots of things happening on screen, but then I don't care. This is not emergent story. This is just about emergent systems. This is not about this is just about being a witness. It's not being an actor of that story. And this is what really is key to make things tick in the mind of the players. So if we are deconstructing a little bit, starting to get dark. Yes, that's better. So common tropes and deconstruction for generated emergent narratives. So if you look at games like the ones that I cited, so Crusader Kings, The Sims, Football Manager, RimWorld, XCOM, and Shadow of Mordor, you can see some common tropes for them. So they all have interesting generated stories. They really rely on systems, on a lot of systems for generation and for generation of characters, for the life of the world, for the rules of the world, but they're mostly focused on systems and not necessarily on level design or linear stories. They're characters-driven experiences, so a lot of characters in these games. Shadow of Mordor is the only exception for a game that only has one main character, but then the emergent stories happen with the structure, with the enemies. The enemies are where the emergent story is about, but then the main character is not one that you're going to remember. So many characters, they all have statistics and traits and things that you're going to remember about them. There are always elements of uncertainty, chaos, things that players cannot control, and simulation, a life of characters beyond what the player is doing. They have their own lives and they interact with one another. Yeah. So if we do a deconstruction about all of these, you have choices, you have mechanics, interactions. This is the grammar of video games. You have systems that combine together. You have a simulation, direct and indirect consequences, things that are happening beyond the player's control. You have some types of automation. Things are moving outside the player's intervention. You have characters, and you have a generated story. So something that you relate to, a sense of agency. So the fact that you have had a certain degree of control, and that you are that you had a role to play in that specific story. And then something tangible, something that you can see on screen for an event or series of events that created a story. So if you're going if you're wondering how to create emergent narrative, not the easy way, but this is how it's to see it. And then, yeah, these generated stories are unique or perceived as unique for players. So it's really about choices, feeding a simulation, generating a specific story, and then going back into choices. And this is that loop. Game design is mostly about creating loops, about gameplay loops, about motivation loops, about all of these dynamics that players can actually use to create and to have fun. And this is also the case for generated emergent narrative. Here I'm going to go briefly over some patterns that you can use for game design. I went deeply about all of these patterns in a talk that's a little bit more technical, called Emergent Stories Through Systems and Characters. I think it's available on YouTube. But basically, the story, the quick pattern here, and the quick thing that I want to tell you about is that there are primary patterns for this game design and supporting patterns. So the primary ones are the ones that I think you're going to need, most of them, if not all of them, to create really a game focused on emergent narrative. So first, of course, you're going to have to create generated story, not scripted, not pre-written, but really generated from the game. You need to have a sense of identity for characters, so and non-playable characters, NPCs, that you're going to remember because they are different and they have something special. Personality, the fact that, yes, they have an opinion about the world and they interact with other NPCs as well. This is not only about the generation of characters, but you also need to see them move and interact with their environment. You need to have an emotional connection to the content that that is on the screen. You need to have discrete agency. So here you're not in control of everything. You're more of an indirect influence over the game systems. Elements of uncertainty. So some parts are random, some parts are more complex. We cannot always predict the future in our life, and this is the same thing with emergent narrative and what makes it meaningful. You have many heroes, not just one or a few. You have many. This is also to bring contrasts between several characters, between ones that really mean something to you and the one who don't, just like the world. You need to have a sense of progression. This is the case for game design, and it's game design fundamentals. But these characters need to progress as well and to evolve. And then a sense of legacy, because it's not only about the story that you're living and that you're going to live, but it's important also to retell that story to players. One principle that I try to apply on my project is tell a story and tell it again, because then this is what makes it meaningful. And having this ledger, this book of stories that already happened and an opportunity for players to relive them is what's going to make them remember about them, and also going to make them more meaningful. And then you have supporting patterns like performance, how good characters can be at certain tasks, and how bad they can be as well. Relationships, how they relate to other characters, but also to you, their opinions. Evolving identity, we all know that interesting characters, they are not fixed. They can evolve through time. They can make drastic choices and change over the course of their lives. Revealed identity, something that's that was somehow hidden from your information and for the things that you knew about a specific character. The fact that they are conscious, they're making choices themselves without you forcing them to do. Critical choices. So here, this is more of a direct impact, but of course, it's going to make something meaningful. And this is my example with my sister. This was a critical choice or a meaningful choice to make. Dialogue, the fact that they're talking and that they are talking to you, for example, this is important. The fact in Football Manager, for example, players can actually tell you, I need to talk to you right now because there's a crisis. Tragedy, of course, because that makes things meaningful. And bugs, very important for emergent stories. These are not the ones that you design for, but they still exist to create emergent stories. And this is something that you see on the internet a lot, right? Someone witnessed a very weird bug and had to tell the whole world about the silliness of that bug, and then shared it to the silliness of it to YouTube or the internet, and this is what makes it. This is something that creates emergent narrative as well. Not necessarily something that we prepare, but still a part of. It still ticks the box, right? It's unique and it's personal to your gameplay usually, and something that may be very funny to witness. So all of these, I hope that I showed you how different it is from designing a game or from writing a story for other mediums, because it's a completely different creative approach. But it's something that's not necessarily too difficult to do. I hope at least for game designers, it's not necessarily about making very complex games. It's just about really making sure that you use different techniques to generate these stories. So it's not traditional. The thing is that we mostly rely on traditional methods to tell stories in games, whether they are visual-based, dialogues, cinematics, but also pure gameplay in your hands. And that's okay. There are lots of very good narrative games that are releasing. This is not for me an opportunity to tell that everyone is wrong, because it's not true. Lots of very, very interesting things are done, and I love playing traditionally written games. But this is something that has potential. This is something that that not a lot of people are actually doing, and this is also why I'm passionate about this topic, because it's somehow there's lots of potential for innovation, lots of potential for breaking new grounds for game design, and for you actually who have the opportunity to experiment and to be super creative, and not to have the pressure of a publisher, or to really be sure that you have a market for your game. This is one way that you can really push innovation. A lot of players, I told you about markets, but actually a lot of players want these experiences. The Sims, it's not a niche game at all. Watch Dogs Promise, it's also very, very popular. Every time that someone actually tries to innovate and to tell their new game design approach about emergent stories, there's lots of people who are going to want to play these things, because they are meaningful, because they are new and they still feel fresh to this day. It's not as complex as it seems, because board games do it too. If board games can do this, you know, all the complexity of the game in board games, they have an impact on the rhythm. For video games, of course, a lot of things are going to be simulated. A lot of things are going to be taken care of by the game and by the computer. So it's okay. But then for board games, these rules need to be handled by the players. And so you can still make emergent narrative in board games, because some of them have done it, and they're doing pretty great. And so, yes, my final point is that I really think here you have the opportunity with the SGA and the support of game creators and myself to really explore and break new grounds, because well, you don't have a lot of opportunities in your life to really be in a cocoon of creation, of creativity, and of innovation, and you are right now. And yeah, I hope that I convinced you that maybe it's one of the way to do things, and I would love to see some of the experiments and some of the ideas, if you think they are meaningful and they talk to you, realized in your projects. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for yeah, watching my talk. I don't have much of an audience or feedback to interact with people, but I'm sure there are some questions. So Relia,
yes. Thank you very much, Rémy. That was really great. We have a couple of questions. I would also ask everybody else who is still with us to post their questions right now, if they have any additional ones. So we're going to start with two questions coming from Petar. So one is, do you believe that choice itself, no matter how deep, can be often perceived as generic gameplay, as opposed to a well-written linear story without real choice, which leaves a much better lasting impression on the player? I don't know if I can also paste the question.
No, it's okay.
Yeah,
I understand it. So this is the creative this is the big creative challenge here, because when you are in control, when you as a creator, you are in the control of the narrative that you want, that you know is great, has a great pacing, has value, has meaning, you are in full control over this. And this is how you can make it meaningful. Then, on the other hand, if you have just generated systems, if you have something that's that players can make choices about, but they don't really care, and it doesn't really make an interesting story, then it's not interesting. And so this is one way to approach this creative problem, is that you need to let go of control in your game design. You need to let go of the fact that you are scared and that you don't know if players are going to like it. For some games, for example, Crusader Kings, EVE Online, a lot of emergent narrative games, they are very complex. And in the few first hours of gameplay, they may not create interesting stories at all. They may not create that sense of connection, of relatedness to what's happening on screen. And so that's a big, that's the biggest creative challenge for emergent narrative, but it's also something that you need to explore. There's no other way around it. You need to let go of control, but making sure that players have the opportunity to make creative choices and things that are meaningful to them, and not as generic as just a basic computer simulation. So it's difficult, but with the patterns and the methodology that I'm presenting you today, I think this is how you create meaning. Of course, this has to be taken deeper, but this is at least a start for methodology.
Thanks a lot. The second question is, I would say, more general. It goes like this. Do you believe that real creativity is very, very hard to achieve in the present day? Like to invent something new, to create something really unique, rather than just taking an existing concept and iterating based upon it?
That's an interesting question. So I believe that innovation, finding a completely new mechanic in game design is very hard, and it's very rare as well, and doesn't necessarily should be the ultimate goal for every feature that you're going to be working on. So I think somehow, and this was a problem also in my when I started my career, I wanted to innovate on everything. I wanted everything to feel new and to feel creative as well, if this word means anything. But my approach now is, I feel like innovation and creativity comes more from maybe taking mechanics that are already existing, but then arranging them in a new way. And something that feels fresh doesn't necessarily mean that everything is new, but then it's really used some mechanics, some ways to create and to share an experience with players has been used in a way that feels new, even though the small elements are things that we've already seen. So I think part of the creativity, or at least how I think a good way to approach this, is that it's okay to borrow things from other games if you are sure about the core aesthetics, the core experience that you want to bring, and that has to be new. That has to be coming from within, right? It has to be your voice, or the voice of your group. And as long as you have that, it's okay to borrow things from other games, but then you need to use them with your voice.
Thanks very much. The next one is more connected directly to emergent narratives. So the question is, what should be an emergent narrative in a sort of a meta game? where you can't grasp what is important and what is what. And as an example, it's mentioned the Stanley parable.
So, okay. It's a little bit hard for me to understand the question. Stanley parable, for example, it's a very good example for a way for scripted stories that are hidden for players and that you're going to unveil slowly by slowly. But it's still centered around characters and around uncovering things. And so, for me, this is not a pure emergent narrative game. But it feels like it, at least.
Okay, thanks. And probably the last question for today is coming from Ognjen, who would like to know, are there any common pitfalls that developers should try to watch out for when designing emerging narratives?
Yes, complexity. These games tend to be very, very complex and technology driven, and so this is the pitfall for me to avoid. The thing is for game design is that you're not creating tools, you're not creating tech, you're not creating an amount of features. You're really designing the minds of the players, and this is all that matters. It's not about trying to have a lot of things, trying to do a pure simulation and to really be true to how humans behave and to psychology, to personality. It's always about creating about putting some seeds in the minds of the players and really developing this through a sense of progression, anticipation, agency, and it's all about trying to capture a story in their minds, and it's all about capturing their imagination, which is here the problem for all mediums, right? It's always about trying to capture the imagination of players, and so I feel like if you keep this design and this goal, you're really creating for players, and you're going to want to play test the game as much as possible to see if your simulation, if your little game actually creates interest, and that the information is good enough for players to actually be hooked and who want to know more. Then you're going to have a good creative and design process. It's always about focusing on the players and on the users of the game, and then yes, trying to make it as simple as possible to create the most interesting stories as possible.
Thanks very much, and I think we have another question that we will round up with. It's a bit longer, so please bear with me. So another Ognjen, he would like to know this. He says, as I understood, life itself can be perceived as an emergent system. Before sapient life, it's emergent gameplay with us humans. It's emergent narration as well, or should I say becoming the one emergent system. So with that in mind, are in the future emergent-based games actually the second form of life, just less complex than the original? I would call the future games a new form of being. It's more than games, definitely coming from games, but in a way more. And he's kind of mentioning VR technology in a way as a reference.
Yeah, so this is a very philosophical question. I like the analogy to life. I made it several times in this talk. I haven't really thought about the cultural impact and the future. I focus very much about the future of game design, a little bit less about art and culture. But this is a great this is a great reflection, and I think I'd like to have this discussion over over a beer or a coffee.
Yeah, hopefully you will be able to visit us maybe later this year or in the next cycle of our program. So I'd really like to thank you very, very much for sharing your experience and your input today. I hope that we'll have another chance to talk about another topic from the game design domain. And I would just like to mention for all of our participants that the next public lectures from Playing Narratives are coming next week, and these will be the last 2 lectures before our summer break. That will be also for the wider community. So on Monday, we're going to have Spielfabrik talking about challenges with publishing. And on next Thursday, June the 10th, we are going to have Simon Levesque from France as well, talking about the historical relationship between comics and games. So this is at the heart of the Playing Narratives project. So hopefully you will also join us at some of those next week. So thanks everyone once more, and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.